All right, good afternoon or good morning to everyone who's joining us today. We're going to get started here in just a minute. We'll let everyone who's coming in from various places, I'm sure everyone's coming in from another meeting, either in person or Zoom. So we'll give everybody a minute to get in. While we wait, would love to hear from those of you who are already here. Let us know where you're from, what campus. It's always really great to see familiar faces joining us here and get a sense of where everyone's logging in from. Oh, what's up, Gabe? Good to see you in here. Pennsylvania on the map. We got Graham and Orlando. Oh man, we got Portland and Idaho. Everyone coming in. Delaware, our smallest states represented here. Hello, Memphis. Hello, Baylor. Oh my gosh, coming in so quick. I think we need to see if we've got all 50 states represented here. I hope so. Feels like we do. I see Rhode Island coming in. Be a tough one to get, but we got it. Maine. Oh, and I even got a shout out for Strava. I really appreciate you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. The things that matter here. Well, it's great to see everybody coming in. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead. Let's see. How are we doing? We got a pretty good contingency coming in here, and we've got a lot of great content to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started off and running here. Appreciate everyone as you keep logging in. Please do keep letting us know where you're coming in from. But I will kick us off here today by, first of all, welcoming you all to Chapter 2 of our CMO study. My name is Steve App. I'm the AVP of Partnerships at Simpson Scarborough. I have said it before. I will say it every time I have the privilege of hosting a webinar for this agency because it's true. There is no shortage of things that you could be doing with this hour right now. I am so grateful that you are spending it with us today. I am joined by three wonderful humans today. Our Sarah Wallace, our Vice President of Strategy at Simpson Scarborough. We're also joined by two incredible marketing leaders, Megan Horton, AVP of Brand Management at Oklahoma State University, and Binti Harvey, Vice President of External Relations and Institutional Advancement at Scripps College. You're going to be hearing from them a little bit later here in the program. I also want to call out that Deb Gear, our Director of Research, and Carrie Barnett, our Head of Marketing, are also here in the chat to answer any questions that you might have as we go through today, and also probably ask you a few of their own where they want to hear from you all. I also just want to context set for everybody for where we are today. We're covering CMO growth ambitions. This is a new topic for us in the CMO study. If you missed Chapter 1 on budgets and staffing, I highly encourage you to grab the recording and mark your calendar for April 23rd. That is when we're covering our third chapter on measurement. We will have a QR code at the end of this presentation to make registering for that chapter as easy as possible for you. Before we dive into our findings today, a little bit of context setting on where this data is coming from. We are thrilled to have 256 lead marketers who completed the study this year. That is one of the highest in our history of conducting the CMO study. Our data that you're going to be hearing about today consists entirely of four-year not-for-profit institutions. And we've got pretty steady representation across size, which is how you're going to hear us slice most of the data today. We'll be doing that by small, medium, and large institutional size. We'll remind you of those numbers as we go through. But let's dive into today's topic. We're talking a lot today about growth, and growth is one of the most overloaded words in higher education. It shows up in strategic plans, board presentations, but rarely with a lot of agreement on what it actually means, right? Is it more students? Is it more revenue, more programs? I would argue that CMOs are expected to pursue all of those things, often simultaneously. But the priorities for that are often shaped by different divisions and on different timelines. In fact, we asked each and every one of you here today when you registered, where does growth strategy leadership sit at your institution? And I think it's telling that half of you told us that growth strategy either has no clear owner or lives in too many places at once. That is exactly why this conversation matters today. Because the result of that situation is that a growth agenda does not feel aligned across campus, even if our data shows that there is alignment across the industry. And with that teaser, let's dig into the data, starting with a baseline question, which is how do CMOs rank their institutional growth priorities? Our data shows a clear top two here. Number one, overwhelmingly, grow enrollment. It's listed as the top priority by 73% of CMOs, and it's in the top two for 88% of CMOs. Second, improve brand awareness and reputation. This was named as the second highest priority by 49% of CMOs, and it's in the top two priorities for 70% of CMOs. Now, this data is industry-wide. So how does the picture change when we analyze this by institutional size? Well, when we break this down by size, the picture remains fairly consistent with a twist. So at small, medium public, and medium private institutions, enrollment dominates across the board, especially at small institutions. More than 3/4 of CMOs at these institutional sizes ranked enrollment as their number one priority. But at large institutions, again, those are over 20,000 students, the data shifts somewhat meaningfully. Enrollment is still ranked as the number one priority by CMOs, but as you can see, it's at a much lower rate, with a higher percentage of CMOs ranking enrollment as their second priority or even their third. And I think it's interesting, we called out this emerging gap in our 2023-2024 CMO study between large institutions and basically every other type of institution. And that was around budgets and staffing. But I think this data is indicating that that chasm we called out, it not only still exists, it probably runs a little bit deeper than we initially thought in terms of also influencing what the growth priorities are for chief marketing officers in this space. So the priority is fairly universal. So is, it turns out, the playbook for that growth. Let me show you what I mean by that. Regionally, we can see that most institutions are prioritizing domestic students, and within that category, in-state students. That's especially pronounced if you're looking at public institutions. You can see medium public, where there's a pretty good gap there. And then you can see that that gap is also wider with the large institutions. Those are overwhelmingly public institutions. And I think that makes sense, right? Given the pressure that those institutions are under to represent their home state's economic, political, and educational priorities. A similar picture of unity emerges when we ask about the degree type being prioritized. Again, across every size institution, we can see that the number one enrollment priority, albeit with a tie for medium privates, is undergraduate students. And you can see there's some pretty significant drop-offs for online and certificate degree types, especially. Now, when we look at this data, it feels like there are two key issues at play. Number one, the growth priority within enrollment, domestic undergraduate students. That is an audience that we all know is shrinking and that we all know is increasingly becoming cost sensitive. So thinking about that as the unified growth priority, it just feels like a race to the bottom waiting to happen. Second, we know that enrollment is just one type of growth. And while CMOs in this study are laser focused on it, and understandably so for in a lot of ways, that means that other critical revenue streams are becoming deprioritized. And I would say that's happening at exactly the moment when diversification of revenue, given the competitiveness for net tuition revenue and the instability of state and federal funding, has never been more important. So, what is it that's being deprioritized in this scenario? Well, let's go back to our priorities. So, when we asked everyone to rank growth priorities, fundraising is what's consistently ranked behind the two priorities named earlier: enrollment and brand awareness. In fact, only 6% of CMOs ranked fundraising as their number one priority. The majority of CMOs ranked it lowest. And that consistency holds across every size category. And that means that this is not just a small school problem, and it's not just a problem at large decentralized institutions. This is pretty clearly a sector-wide pattern. And I think that is what makes it worth pausing on, because this is the alignment gap for this chapter. The space between where CMOs are prioritizing growth and everything else happening on campus. Because I think in an ideal world, we'd all agree that the growth priority would be on brand awareness and reputation, because that would have clear and equal downstream impacts on enrollment and fundraising metrics. But it just doesn't feel like that's what we're seeing right now. Now, what are the barriers between where we are right now and where we'd like to be? Well, we asked you that exact question. And two items top the list by a pretty wide margin when we asked respondents this question, or registrants this question. Number one, silos and fragmentation. And number two, budget, resourcing, and staffing. And I think it's worth noting that these are not necessarily separate problems, right? They're both symptoms of the same system. And so that begs the question, how do we turn growth into a more cohesive system? The answer to that question is well above my pay grade, but luckily for you all, I brought backup today in the form of our VP of Strategy, Sarah Wallace. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. So Steve's covered what our CMO study is telling us about strategic priorities for CMOs today. I'm gonna shift into a closer look at the system those priorities are operating inside. And the reality is that most institutions aren't lacking activity. I think we all know that. They're lacking connection. Advancement, enrollment, product, student experience, all of these are growth drivers. In many institutions, each of these is working really hard, but they're not necessarily working together. Teams often ask if they're investing enough in marketing, and we don't think that's the right question to be asking. We think the right question is the system designed to convert effort into outcomes? This is where alignment, as Steve was saying, starts to get misunderstood. A lot of institutions, they try to solve this with more control. That turns into more approvals, more centralization, and more oversight. But alignment doesn't come from control. It comes from clarity in the story that you're telling, confidence in what the institution stands for, and shared understanding across teams about how all of this work connects. Without those things, you can coordinate activity, but an institution cannot create the momentum that it needs. When we look at what the CMOs are prioritizing, the focus is on all the right things. Heavy emphasis on brand strategy, you have websites or overall digital experience, and then you have the overarching brand experience. These are all crucial foundational elements of growth. So this shows us that we don't have a situation of misaligned priorities. It's really a situation of incomplete systems. Investing in the groundwork to connect all of these things creates true value and momentum when we're focused on how to recruit students, how to engage alumni, and how you position your institution in the market as one cohesive picture. What we know is this, that brands build trust, experience reinforces it, and advancement and enrollment convert it. If those pieces aren't connected, you don't have a growth engine. Advancement was listed as the third ranked priority, as Steve highlighted. Only 6% ranked it as first, with 58% ranking it as last in this year's CMO study. For us, this means it's the biggest opportunity for institutions because it's a likely space where the system breaks down internally. When you reframe the role or the impact that advancement can have across brand and enrollment, you can see the potential for advancement to be a long-term driver of growth and a more connected system. So we're going to focus on advancement in this part of the discussion and peel apart the opportunity a little bit further. At their best, advancement campaigns deliver clear value propositions, personalized engagement with audiences, they work across an expansive network, and they serve as a strong articulation of the institutional brand. When they don't, the experience is disjointed for audiences and risks compromising deep established relationships, high capacity donors, and it doesn't engage new partners effectively. This is especially pertinent in today's landscape because of shifting donor trends. Institutions are seeing a growing concentration of donors, fewer households are giving, and a smaller group are contributing a larger share. This trend is likely to continue in part because sources of giving are evolving. Foundations, in particular, are on the rise. Many of those are led by alumni, with a smaller but fluctuating and evolving share coming from corporations and other organizations. And that's where the door starts to open a little bit. Institutions need to demonstrate clear value and relevance, whether that's for advancement, enrollment, or brand. They can't rely on broad, diffuse engagement with each of those individually anymore. This thinking shifts what advancement needs to and ultimately what it can deliver. Advancement is evolving from just an affinity focus to opening doors and building connections to reputation and brand equity, workforce alignment, program differentiation, and measurable outcomes. When advancement leverages brand and enrollment inputs as part of a campaign strategy, the approach naturally pulls the system together. Essentially, what we're describing here is an audience-centered strategy, one that creates a holistic experience and drives strong outcomes across the board. So we've set the stage here a little bit for how advancement campaigns can unify and amplify CMO's biggest priorities today, which brings us to a key question. What does this look like inside an institution that's working to build a connected system and leverage advancement as a growth lever? We've talked about it conceptually. Let's talk about what it feels like inside the work. So we're going to hear from two CMOs who are navigating this in real time. We have Megan Horton and Binti Harvey with us here today. Megan Horton is currently the Associate Vice President of Brand Management at Oklahoma State University, where she provides strategic counsel to university leadership and oversees all marketing and communications for the OSU system. Megan and her team recently launched a comprehensive fundraising campaign in close collaboration with the OSU Foundation. And Binti Harvey is the Vice President for External Relations and Institutional Advancement at Scripps College. Binti has amplified the institution's brand, built an integrated advancement enterprise, and fostered sustained growth in enrollment, fundraising, and constituent engagement in her time at Scripps College. So thank you both so much for being here with us today. I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask both of you so we can hear more about each of your experiences. So let's do it. Okay. Question number one. When strategically aligning enrollments, advancement, and marketing became a more intentional discussion for you, what changed in how the work gets done, whether that's structure, collaboration, or who you brought to the table?
Thank you, Sarah. This is a great question. I'm happy to share what happened at Oklahoma State. The honest answer for us is that the conditions forced it, and then we chose to lean in. We had a leadership transition, a new president, and donor sentiment was really strong and in support for our institution moving forward, and we knew we had to capitalize on that. But a moment like that only works if the relationships and the groundwork are already there. And so that was the lesson for us, that you build in the quiet so that you can really move when the moment comes. What practically changed for us was who was in the room. So I made it a priority to advocate for a seat in the fundraising campaign leadership meetings, not just as a service provider, but as a strategic voice for our institution. And then we also got really intentional when we think about socialization and pulling the right people in early in the process. So that included our enrollment management colleagues, our fundraising colleagues, alumni relations, and athletics. Was not an afterthought. They were included in the research and discovery phase of our campaign, which I'll talk about a little more, and had a real line of sight into the development and socialization of our campaign concepts. With that, the structural shift followed the relational shift, frankly. And what we found is when people trust each other and share a line of sight, the org chart starts to matter less. Oh, Binti, we can't hear you.
So sorry. Hello, everyone. I feel like I'm the amen corner today. Like I'm really just snapping my fingers and nodding my head to everything that's been said. And so happy to jump into the conversation, but even more happy to hear from all of you who are on screen. And thank you for your time for joining us today. So I would respond to that question, Sarah, first by really emphasizing that this is a evolution, it's a progression, right? And so before the work could change, the way that we thought and the way that we approach the work had to change. And so I want to talk about it sort of as a couple of paradigm shifts that then we operationalized through our work. And so the first is really adopting this sense of collective responsibility for reputation, revenue, and relationships across the entire division. And so we needed to use these themes as a sort of framework for setting our individual team and division level goal setting process. It allowed us to move beyond thinking about these as discrete functional areas that all happen to sit under the same organizational structure and work alongside one another doing different but related work. And instead to move to this sense of synthesis and cohesion that you referenced, Sarah, where we really are understanding how each unit is accountable for reputation, revenue, and relationships. And so what that looks like in practice is that in the annual goal setting process, of course, the alumni engagement team is going to be speaking about and developing their goals to reflect how they're deepening relationships. But they're also going to have a goal that's very specifically focused on revenue generation. Similarly, for the philanthropy team, of course, their goals are going to include meeting fundraising targets and securing gifts, but there will also be goals in their portfolio that are focused on contributing to reputational strength. And so in having these conversations, we ensure that there's accountability across all three domains and across the entire division. Another way that we've accomplished this or sort of operationalized this is through infusing this responsibility into our strategic priority areas for the division. So right now, at least, those are growing brand equity, building the donor pipeline, and securing transformative gifts. Those are the three areas that we've identified as having greatest sort of long-term, measurable, meaningful, sustainable institutional impact. And so we come together monthly to discuss and review the data points, the KPIs that we've agreed that we will, as a group, monitor to ensure our performance and progress against those strategic priorities. So we come together as a division monthly to talk about the Net Promoter Score, to look at our engagement scores, and to look at the number of principal gifts and the way that those are moving. And then we have these conversations through this lens of priority audience segments. So we're thinking about prospective new students and families, young alums, and our top donors. So when we are able to apply these three lenses as a team collectively, sort of talking about how we're moving the things that we've deemed most important, then it turns into an integrated conversation about alumni engagement, philanthropy, enrollment marketing, and brand strategy, and how we are leveraging all of those to move the needle for the institution. Second paradigm shift, I'm talking really fast because I'm trying to cram so much into this conversation, but second is shared definition of success. Again, we sort of loosely generally had this shared definition, but really how do we elevate that above the unit level? And so what that's translated into for us at Scripps is lifelong affinity. Our charge is to build and strengthen and sustain lifelong affinity among our constituents and to deepen it over time. And so one of the pieces that's been an interesting sort of aha for me is recognizing that that progression isn't always going to be linear because there's so many individuals and interactions that affect how our audiences perceive and experience our brand. You spoke to this as well, Sarah, in your initial comments. And so it changed how we partnered with our sort of institutional campus partners. So we're having conversations with them that are focused on how we capitalize on the goodwill that we create, particularly through the enrollment marketing process, and how do we then focus on continuing to raise the Net Promoter Score over time and galvanize philanthropic investment in the long run. So some of the partnerships that have emerged out of that or that have changed as a result of that is working with student affairs, for instance, to improve the residential experience, which our market research told us was eroding our brand equity. Working with facilities to reimagine the campus master plan. So it's not just about which buildings we build, but how are we making sure that there's sufficient community space, which is one of our institutional differentiators as this small, intimate community. How are we making sure that we're building that into our campus spaces? Business affairs, we have worked with them to really maximize the growth of the financial aid and career services endowments, which again have a very direct impact on enrollment outcomes because those are areas that are very connected to how our prospects see the value proposition. Last piece, and I'm sorry, I will close up, is paradigm shift around redefining the marketing imperative. And so really broadening or widening the aperture to think about our role as marketers as being not only strengthening institutional identity, but also stewarding constituent identity. And so when we think about marketing being involved in every stage of cultivating identity from prospect to student to alum to volunteer to donor, how do we make sure that we're maximizing our role as the connective tissue between the brand and the experience? And so when we think about especially those inflection points, when one moves from one sort of institutional identity or membership in one institutional group to the next, how are we easing the transitions at those inflection points? How are we ensuring that we're looking at the marketing funnel and the donor continuum, not as constructs that we have to adhere to, but how do we actually overlay those two frameworks? So we're thinking about a prospective student as a future donor, a current donor as a brand promoter. How do we bring all of those together so that we're really, again, sort of creating this sense of we're embodying our role and our responsibility as stewards of the brand from earth to the grave. So.
Thank you both so much. I think really a few critical points and themes coming up in how you both responded is the critical nature of relationship building and social connections. More importantly, or most importantly, as Megan noted, in the moments that they don't feel essential per se or absolutely necessary, I think it's an ongoing component. And when there's a shared vision, it allows teams to connect under one roof and really understand how the roles that they play day to day, whether that's enrollment, advancement, or brand, all ladder up to that shared vision. Having that accountability and connection, I think, helps institutions going through complex or unexpected change, as Megan noted, really survive and even sometimes thrive coming out of those scenarios. Okay, our second question for you. Can you share an example of how you've connected an advancement effort to enrollment or broader institutional goals, and what made that possible that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Yeah, Sarah, you mentioned earlier that we recently launched a campaign, and one of our guiding campaign goals was to remove the gap between donor and student. Early on in the process, that became a framing that changed everything in terms of the perspective our partners that were working with us to create the campaign. So, Benti, I completely agree that thinking about our audiences and the connectedness between them and not operating in silos was a huge focus for us as well. And just having a goal that focused on that in terms of how we would do the hard work and focusing on removing that gap, not just from an audience standpoint, but also from an experience standpoint. You know, a lot of times we we cultivate gifts and we cultivate the student experience, but how often do we try to bridge, the connectedness between those two groups and that they understand the relevance of each? So that was really a key point for us when we were planning our campaign that we focused on and became our shared North Star between all our partners that were pulling it together. So our campaign is the clearest example of what this coming to life looks like. We launched the Code Calls campaign this past fall, and it is a $2 billion comprehensive fundraising and branding campaign. I'll be honest, we launched it on the third try. So I talked about transition and leadership shifts. And so we had to postpone public announcements, shifting institutional priorities, and a team that was taxed all within a year. So we had a lot going on. But I mentioned previously, we still had very strong donor support, and they resoundingly said our moment is now. And so despite those constraints, it pushed us to reimagine what that campaign launch could be. We had a very tight timeline, but we leaned into each other and that shared purpose of elevating our institution by having one voice across all constituents to really drive us forward. And so what we built was a university-wide platform rooted in the Cowboy Code. So the Cowboy Code is our shared values identity. It was developed in deep partnership with all the Marcom professionals across our 5-campus system. But we had a core team that comprised my leadership team and our advancement leadership team to build it together. And we had a project implementation team that included representation from enrollment, athletics, admissions, foundation, and alumni, so that when we built out a full marketing communications plan for the rollout, it was inclusive of all those audiences. And the way we represented that brand identity and brand platform thought big picture about what would reach them in the most effective way. So, instead of a traditional fundraising campaign that lived in just the advancement arena, this was designed to reach every Cowboy, alumni, donors, students, faculty, staff, campus communities, and the state of Oklahoma and everyone beyond that. So we had a really successful launch. Super proud of what our team pulled together in 4 months. Our Simpsons Cargo partners know that, but not only did we have a couple of postponed launches, but we completely pivoted on the brand concept and leaned hardcore into each other to develop something that was deeply rooted in who we are, what we knew would connect with our audiences and really would elevate the affinity with our institution. And with our launch event, we had nearly 5,000 participants across our system in person with satellite events at each of our institutions. We had a lot of media placements, over 160 million impressions, a really strong paid media strategy. And none of that would have been possible without having this unified approach for fundraising, branding, enrollment, and everyone's pulling in the same direction. And practically, this also meant pulling in and looking at the giving trends from different constituent groups and weaving those donor insights directly into kind of how we communicated within enrollment materials and messaging. So we heard loud and clear in our research and discovery process, we are so proud of our degree, but your brand is not strong enough. You need to be in more markets. We want to be in a boardroom and look across at the person from us that graduated from a different institution and feel that pride. Like, I graduated from Oklahoma State. And so we're really starting to treat, and this came straight from our foundation president. She said she's starting to treat our philanthropists and donors more like investors and stakeholders because they have a vested interest in how our institution is performing and how we are growing. And that's how they see themselves, frankly. And they told us directly that we need to get better. And that feedback really galvanized all the teams working on this and gave the internal permission to make unified messaging a non-negotiable. And what made it possible was the partnership. And you mentioned over time, this is not the first time that we've worked closely with our colleagues and really focused on how important those relationships are. So, our advancement colleagues, to their credit, let go of the idea of having a separate fundraising brand. And that they also saw that a unified brand was necessary to build trust and elevate our reputation to achieve the big outcomes that we needed, and understood that that actually amplifies everything.
I love that, Megan, and I want to double click on your point about sort of the importance of real-time feedback and being able to incorporate that into to refine your messaging. And so we've been actually activating our student affairs and mission and gift officers to actually take messaging out and pilot it as opposed to the traditional testing approach, and then to incorporate that feedback and refine and tailor it for those audiences. So wanted to just underscore that. I think the example that I'll use is looking at how fundraising opportunities can give us an opportunity to help clarify our value proposition and articulate our brand strategy in a more meaningful or effective way. So we at Scripps had been, we'd had great enrollment marketing success as defined by the number of applications. Had no issues there. People were, willing to sell what we were buying and interested in attending Scripps. And so application numbers were up and growing over time. But what we were experiencing was declining yield, which of course there is a marketing aspect to that. And we developed a marketing strategy to try and address it. But as we dug into the research and the data and the feedback from applicants, this was ultimately a funding problem. We were losing out to our wealthier peers with larger financial aid endowments. So when a private foundation announced a $500 million grant opportunity where they'd be giving grants to top tier liberal arts colleges to increase enrollment of lower income students in particular, we felt that this was something that we needed to seize on to help address our enrollment problem. So we convened academic affairs, student affairs, business affairs, admissions, philanthropy, to really think about how to best position Scripps. And in doing so, where we landed is that our proposal needed to emphasize the institutional differentiators that were aligned with the foundation goals. So for us, that's our women's college identity and sort of the way that we cultivate empowerment and self-efficacy and agency. We were able to link our strong retention and graduation rates to the high challenge, high support academic environment, deep faculty interaction, personalized resources, et cetera, and then to really emphasize the multiplier effect of the Claremont Consortium and all of the rich sort of educational and co-curricular opportunities that offers. As a result of that grant proposal, we were one of only 10 institutions out of hundreds that we received this grant award, which contributed to reputational impact, to sort of the prestige of being among that small selective group. Two, invigorated our fundraising. And so there was a matching challenge or a matching component as a part of the foundation's sort of structure for the grant. And that really allowed us to galvanize our community around meeting this challenge, stepping up to the plate. And so we were able to not only meet, but exceed that fundraising goal. But more importantly to me, we grew or have been able to grow our financial aid endowment over time. As a result, that's reduced the percentage of students that we package with loans, which in turn increases yield. And so when we think about this sort of market-informed strategy, the cross-collaboration, the future-oriented approach, all of those things together, I think, help sort of reinforce this story of how having this really integrated marketing advancement strategy can lead to institutional outcomes that far exceed what you could do in any of those units working alone.
Yeah, that's great. And I imagine some shifting trends in giving right now, and the ability to give to something specific or help have some influence or direct control. I don't like that word, but I can't think of a better one in this moment, right? In terms of where that money is going and how it may be supporting a future student who then becomes part of that cycle. And overall brand experience for the institution is really fantastic. I think what's interesting about what each of you shared is that once sort of a root cause is identified, how teams can come together to build something really strong, right? The yield cause was identified clearly, and so a set strategy was put into play. I think the time parameters, while challenging in moments, I'm sure, Megan, also brought groups together under the umbrella of we want to put this campaign in motion and we want to bring people together in the right ways, and that can really bring people together and bring the best ideas into play, resulting in really strong outcomes. Okay, question 3. What does this kind of work require from you as a leader that's different from how you may show up in a more fragmented or siloed structure at an institution?
That's a great question, Sarah. And you talked about the how important the people are. Just want to use Benty's term, double click on that. I mentioned earlier our tight timeline and that the teams were taxed because of the shifts on when our campaign would launch and how it would launch. And even though we had a tight timeline, the way we did the work really built the buy-in and the strong foundation for elevating the work. So it turned a really hard, challenging thing to a positive. And it really takes, someone that will champion that work in a positive way. But it also requires us to do the people work and not take emotional shortcuts whenever you're doing big things or even little things. In our roles, we know this, but not relying on authority or process to create alignment. Trust is built in the long term, and it takes a while. And so it's in those, little moments that happens. And so a lot of times it's with people who have historically operated in silos and are protective of their brand and their lane. And, the temptation is to avoid those hard relational moments and to route around the points of friction just for sake of our role. We have massive institutional priorities to keep driving those things forward. And at times, those small little friction points, it feels, it's like it's easy to bypass it. But if you do the hard work and you lean into it, the friction is where the real work happens, and not compromising in those critical, moments, can really help you to push forward. So I just would encourage, everyone on this webinar to lean into doing that hard work. It requires us to think about micro moments, that every interaction is a relationship building opportunity. And I just want to start with empathy here because while I'm talking about this big campaign that we launched in the fall, the work that we do is really, really hard. And I, just like for us, sometimes the conditions are not ideal for doing big work. And we're all operating in some version of structural dysfunction or competing priorities. But as a champion, you can be the one that unlocks, the superpowers of your institution by connecting those dots. And so just those points of friction, while hard, take care of yourself. I get it, and just empathize. And there's never a reason to stop doing the big work if you're, by cultivating those relationships now, when that moment comes, a new president, a campaign launch, a major donor conversation, you'll be positioned to move. And having empathy with those that you're operating with. I mentioned broadening your socialization group. That's hard because you need the thing to be good for your institution. So I want to acknowledge that too. We started doing this years ago with smaller initiatives. So I mentioned that we brought in all those groups for our branding and comprehensive fundraising campaign socialization. But we actually started doing this with social media by bringing together our key contacts from those groups to align digital strategy and for them to think differently about digital content across their channels. And they were really able to see some wins from that. So it does start small and can grow from there.
Plus one, everything that Carrie said. What I would add is that I think for me, it's really been a shift toward prioritizing building organizational capacity. Organizational capacity building is sort of my number one job. And so I think that requires us as leaders to be more future oriented, which I will again reiterate what Carrie said. It's hard. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time because we have our annual sort of short-term, near-term goals that we have to meet. But we also want to be sort of holding, in the other hand, holding simultaneously this responsibility for mission resilience and institutional sustainability and growth, as Steve and Sarah talked about at the top of the session. So I think that future orientation. Second, that really recognizing, acknowledging that this is time consuming. So in addition to everything that Megan said about it being sort of difficult and forcing us to go outside of our comfort zones, that it also just takes way longer than we're accustomed to. And I don't know how many of you have the same sort of action orientation that I do, but I like to see results and I like to see them quickly. And I like to be able to draw a straight line between what I did and sort of what it generated, but sort of reorienting myself so that I can really understand that this is going to take time and that a lot of the work will seem invisible until it's not. And so how do we allocate our time and resources accordingly? And then I think the third piece is this enterprise focus. And so as leaders of this kind of work, that time spent not only developing partnerships, but also really understanding the business imperatives, challenges and opportunities that our institutions face and aligning our strategy with those so that we can be better partners across the institution. And so not just thinking about our typical partners that might be enrollment and even student affairs, but you've heard me mention several times business affairs. Get close to your money people. And the more that the two of you can be aligned, then that will also help with strengthening those other partnerships as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both so much. That was really great foundation setting for what it takes. I think the idea of it being a marathon and not a sprint is really important, paired with there are many roles across higher ed today that are navigating these murky waters, and there is strength in numbers. All right, so having the conversation, I think, helps to elevate how you build strategic connections over time to really elevate your institution. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to hand it over to Steve, who's going to facilitate this portion.
Yeah, Binti and Megan, you're not off the hook quite yet. I'm going to try to do the impossible. In 7 minutes, we're going to try to knock through 3 key questions I've seen come through. So we're going to see how we can do this. And I want to start with a question around a very specific audience in terms of getting people on board. And those are college and university presidents. This question came in early in the session. How can college and university presidents be persuaded that an integrated approach will benefit their institution, especially when they are individually oftentimes so hyper-focused on enrollment individually?
Binti, I'll let you start first
Okay.
since you got to start the other ones first.
A couple of things I would say. One is that one of presidents' primary responsibilities is fundraising. And so if you can continue to make that connection between the advantages of this integrated approach and their success as a fundraiser for the institution, I think that's one way to get their attention. And to sort of underscore that they can't have the same kind of direct impact on enrollment that they can have on advancement.
Yeah.
And so as the sort of chief spokesperson for the institution and the one who is most equipped to connect these dots between donors and prospective students, then I think it's also appealing to their sense of perhaps vanity and, just sort of how we can make sure that they understand that this is critical to their success and that it's a place where they can have direct influence and impact in a way that I think is kind of not really often, presidents don't often have.
I think that's such a great way to think about it in terms of getting them bought into their own success there. Megan, I'm going to throw the next question over to you because I think it works with Oklahoma State's kind of size and breadth. This question came in anonymously. And we've talked a lot about enrollment versus advancement. I want to talk specifically within branding for a moment. This question is, how do you bring divisions under the university branding umbrella? You've talked a lot about this institution-wide platform. When a lot of colleges and units, they've got their own branding already that they want to maintain or in some cases maybe expand.
Yeah, it's very challenging. So I'll just start there. For us, it's been years and years of work. So if you don't have one, I would encourage you to have a marketing and communication strategic plan for your institution. We have had one for about 8 years now, and early on, it started with elevating our brand identity because we had very disparate messaging, visual identity components, and rebranded in 2019 under one mark. So in 2019, we retired about 200 subsidiary marks, and did that, believe it or not, with little pushback. But it was because of how much socialization and research that we did on the front side. So I would say this work requires that hard work on the front side because people want to know why. A lot of times they're when they're coming from an academic college or institution that's outside of central brand, keeping that big picture in mind and the goals and sharing that, which we all had a line of sight into the strategic plan and could talk about that, but also why we're doing the work and what insights we have that are driving that change and how it would benefit each of those respective areas. So there was very heavy socialization. We have a marketing and communications council with representation from each of our large colleges and divisions that meets monthly. They are our partners in all of this work and valued colleagues. And I would say the other thing is to go back to the previous question, your university leadership, your president and provost have to be aligned that this needs to be a strategic priority and that it impacts revenue and all these things that we're talking about. If you have a segmented brand, you can't do big things. So it's not sexy, but you have to start with, your visual identity, your messaging, like that platform, the way you represent yourself to all audiences. Your president has to understand why that matters so that they will hold the line when they try to work around you. And thankfully, we've had all of those things. So it's been very helpful, but it takes time.
It's the most accurate answer and sometimes the worst answer to get, right? Is it takes time and it's hard.
Yeah. But I think working it from the top and bottom, honestly, like that way you can get there.
Love it. One last question here, which we're going to try to knock out in a matter of 2-3 minutes. And I'll let you both respond because you might have different answers here. This question came in from Heather, and it's specific to one of those priorities we mentioned here around brand awareness and reputation. A question around what KPIs are you both using to measure success in reputation specifically?
So the shared one that we keep the closest eye on is Net Promoter Score. You heard me refer to that a couple of times because we see that as both the amalgamation of many reputation metrics or sort of marketing metrics, but moving from that place of activity and or campaign specific goals and targets to a place of how are we actually affecting ultimately the perception, experience, and willingness to sort of advocate and be an ambassador for and ultimately hopefully invest in the institution. So that's the one that we've decided to sort of keep top of mind and really pay closest attention to and to move over time.
And I will be honest, this is a growth area for us and something that we're working on in our upcoming Marcom strategic plan. One of the things that when we're working on our branding campaign that we found is, we need broader awareness around our brand. And so we're looking at different ways to measure that. Of course, we monitor standard measurements, but Net Promoter Score is something we're looking at but haven't implemented. But yeah, I'd say that's what we're doing right now.
If I can add one thing is that we utilize it at different levels, right? And so we of course do the sort of audience and population wide survey on a regular basis, but we've also started actually collecting or gauging the Net Promoter Scores at specific events or specific activities, and sort of so that we can then overlay and align these kinds of strategies or practices align with raising the Net Promoter Score or attracting people who are more likely to recommend, et cetera, so that we can really utilize it at different levels of the organization and the strategy. And I see Steve giving me the eye, so I'll shut up.
And one thing, I'm sorry, I wanted to add was also audience insights. When you think about reputation, we think about the big, metrics, right? But we are doing more research and discovery and surveying of our audiences, because how prospective students feel about us, donors feel about us, all of these audiences that we're talking about, that is a distinct measure of reputation. And so do they feel that our brand brings value, and digging into those audience insights? It's a very granular piece of it, but I think an important piece of it, because if you're intimately aware of who you're talking to and what their, key areas of focus are, I think we can do much more effective work.
Great. Well,
Megan, I think that is music to Deb's ears in particular on this call, hearing you sing the praises of that level of research. I just want to say really quick, thank you, Binti and Megan, for so graciously lending your expertise and perspective to this community. And thank you, Sarah, for leading a really great conversation there. For everyone who's with us here, before we end our time together, I just want to leave you with 3 ways that you can keep this conversation going. Number 1, we've talked a lot in this study around how marketing leaders are prioritizing growth overall across the industry. We do have a tailored self-assessment that you can take to help you understand the state of your specific growth system, that system that Sarah was describing earlier. So this assessment covers 5 questions, each benchmarked against one of the 5 conditions that separate marketing as a support function from marketing as a growth system. The score would place you in one of 4 maturity stages, ranging from fragmented to growth system. It takes less than 3 minutes to complete. Your results will arrive in your inbox immediately after, with a summary of your stage, what it means, and what the path forward could look like. So think of this less as a report card and more as a starting point. So you can scan the QR code on your screen if you want to take that assessment. Carrie is also dropping direct links into the chat. Do it now, and the results will be in your inbox before your next meeting. I promise you it's real quick. Second, CMO Lab. You can see my excellent product placement behind me, wrong corner. This is where we're going to take this conversation out of slides and into the room, right? So this is senior leaders, working sessions, real operating questions around budgets, staffing, alignment, decision rights. We're going to be in Boulder, Colorado this year. It is looking gorgeous out there. If you were with us in chapter 1, you know that we are known for our fun evening activities. This year, we've got a sunset hike and stargazing on the agenda. You can, again, scan the code here if you want to view the entire agenda, if you want to browse speakers, and register for one of our limited remaining spots. Would love, love, love to see you with us in Boulder this June. And please let me know if you have any questions. You can reach out directly. I'm happy to answer those. And finally, as I mentioned at the top, chapter 2 is one of just 3 great chapters that are supporting this year's study. So if this is the kind of conversation you would like more of, again, April 23rd, our 3rd and final chapter on brand measurement. Again, you know the drill now. You can scan the code or you can click on the link that Carrie's putting in the chat. And that is how you register for chapter 3. But one more time, a huge thank you to Megan Horton, Binti Harvey, Sarah Wallace, Carrie and Deb work in the chat and helping us get to this place. Also, special shout out to our designer, Ashlyn, who helped us put together this report and presentation. And a thank you to every one of you who have, again, taken time out of your day to be with us. I love this community, and it wouldn't be anything without the people who show up all the time and share their own opinions and wins and challenges. It's something really unique to this space that I know we all love and feel called to serve. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. Keep on keeping on. We'll see you next time. Thanks, y'all.